G'day, welcome to another episode of Built by Dan and yet another instalment in my GT40 kit build series. In today's episode, I'm going to be focusing on the rear body panel or the rear clip here in front of me and fitting off all the various vents and lights, including attempting to recess a third brake light into this top bar of the body panel at the top of the rear windscreen. Alright, so it's taken me a couple of weeks to pull this episode together. Basically, I've just been spending a bit of time procrastinating. I wasn't sure whether to start with addressing all of the seams from the body molds and getting all them sanded back and polished before I fit off these components, or whether I just get stuck into fitting off the vents and the lights and worry about the seams and the bodywork later. I did have a bit of a crack at sanding back some of the seams and polishing it up just to see how it would work. It actually came up pretty good. It's just going to be a very long and tedious process, something that I might just chip away at in the background. I might make an episode later on to show what the process is that I'm using to complete that task. So after procrastinating as to which way to go, I've decided just to crack on with fitting off the vents and the lights and starting to get all the different components fitted off. So again, likely they'll have to come off as part of the bodywork, but at least all the holes are drilled, threads are tapped where necessary, and it can just be unbolted and then bolted back on for final assembly. So let's have a quick look at what we're going to cover in today's episode, and then we'll get stuck straight into it. So I decided this was going to be easiest with the rear clip removed from the vehicle, just so I'm not drilling and creating too much dust over the chassis and engine itself. So we have rear tail lights, and I acknowledge that some early comments, I think it was from one of my detailed parts overview videos, is that they're not really the correct style tail light. So I understand that. I'm just working with what was supplied in the kit for now, and I may look to swap them out later. I think the correct ones are based on a Fiat. We've got the rear vent panels, so I've just clamped them into place. Interestingly, they don't really follow the shape of the body all that well, so I'm just going to have to center them as best as possible. Because if I start trying to reproduce them, things are going to look out of whack because they'll be out of square, I suppose. So some things I just need to let go. They're never going to be perfect. Down the floor here, I've got a reverse light. So the reverse light gets mounted into one of these holes in the rear vent. So I will need to position that and fit that off. I've got a couple of brackets here. That'll be a task I'll do a bit later once I've got everything else fitted off. These brackets actually mount up in behind this lip. And so they sit in behind there. You can see the sort of triangle shape of the bracket. They stand up on end. And that is the fit-off point for the rear gas struts to hold the rear clip open. They then fit off at the other end to the chassis. Up the top here we have another vent panel, fairly simple, just need to drill out the holes, and there's a bolt with a nylock nut. I have my license plate lamps. So I'm not really set on what I'm going to do here just yet. This recess for the license plate, it's an odd shape for standard Australian license plates, particularly this sort of recess that's in here. The plate will not fit in that recess, but it also struggles to sort of straddle to the top and bottom section that's protruding out. They're also not that wide, so I'm undecided as to whether I'm even going to fit these lights off this episode. I'm just going to work through the other items and probably come back to that piece last. And I may put that on hold and go and buy some aluminium sheet and actually create a panel to infill this whole area. And then I can mount my lights where I want them, because I may want them to sit somewhere here so that they're actually close to the license plate rather than sitting out so wide. Or I may still put them out wide, but at least if I put an aluminium sheet on there, it'll just make it look consistent rather than having this hole on the side, because the license plate won't cover it. I'm also still looking at whether I can integrate a rear view camera or reverse camera. And I want to try and replicate what they do on the new Corvette C8 and try and have it as a full-time monitor rather than having a mirror. So a couple of things I'm still working on there, but just looking at how I can prepare now to be able to integrate them later. Last but not least, I am looking to recess a third brake light just at the top of the rear windscreen here. Now the manufacturer does offer this as an option. I did not realise that was an option at the time I placed my order. So I got a nasty looking stick-on light that just has some 3M double-sided tape to stick on the back of the windscreen. It looks hideous. I'm not happy with it, but when I did start looking at it, I found that there was actually just a nice LED panel mounted inside the housing that was made to pivot, and I was able to remove that, and it's a pretty decent size that I'm confident I will be able to mount it in here. Now you can see I've already marked it up. I've just marked my center, come out from each side and the depth. And I'm confident there's enough fiberglass there that I'm not going to have to take too much out, that it's going to compromise that section. So we'll see how we go. I'll take a little bit out at a time and hopefully we can get that to fit and I'll have a nice recessed third brake light. I'd like to interrupt today's video to thank Brilliant.org for sponsoring yet another episode. Brilliant.org is the best way to learn math, science and computer science regardless of your age or skill level. Brilliant has thousands of lessons from foundational and advanced math to data science, neural networks and more, with new lessons added monthly. I've been using the Brilliant platform for some time now and I've thoroughly enjoyed the simplicity of the platform and the way the courses are structured to progressively build on prior learnings and knowledge. Lately, I've been working my way through the course on infinity, helping me to develop an understanding of what infinity is, how to count to infinity, and the different visual infinities. The Brilliant website is compatible on desktop as well as mobile devices, so it's accessible regardless of how busy your lifestyle is. To try everything Brilliant has to offer, free, for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/builtbydan or click the link in the description below. On top of that, the first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. So what are you waiting for? Go check it out. All right, so I don't really have a particular order as to how I'm going to fit these off, but I think I might just start with one side, work my way across to the other. So I'll start with the tail light. The tail light does just screw together. It has some screws on the back here, which I assume are for mounting, but that's not what I'm going to be using here. Basically, for this kit, it's just intended that the fiberglass will be sandwiched between the front and rear housing. So the front housing will just sit in there, and then the rear housing from the back, and then use a couple of screws that hold the lens on to actually sandwich them together. And that's pretty much it. So I'm hoping the screws are going to be long enough. We'll see how we go. So the headlights did come with the screws and these little rubber washers for the screws to try and seal that lens. Looks like I might need to drill out those holes in the lens to even get the screws to fit. So the headlight also comes with a rubber seal, so I am going to use this. It will just help seal the lens to the body. The rear housing, I will probably look to run some silicone around that just to try and seal that from the inside, because it is right at the back of the wheel guard. So if we are driving in the wet, it's likely just to spray up all the water in the back there, and the last thing I need is to get too much water into these headlights, tail lights. Well, that's good. The rubber seal's actually got some extra length to it, so it can be cut down. Now I have purposely run this around so that the joint is at the bottom rather than at the top. I'll need to go grab some tools so I can actually drill out this lens so I can get the screws in. and then we should be able to fit it off. All right, so I've trimmed down that rubber seal. The screws, I did actually just grab the screwdriver and screw them in rather than drilling out the hole. And now I'm going to see if my arms are long enough to actually see if we can fit this off. Feels like it went nowhere. Pretty sure these screws are not long enough. All right, back to the drawing board. I'm going to have to get some longer screws. These ones are just nowhere near long enough. Just having a look at the thickness of that fiberglass, it's probably 5-6 mil, and based on these screws, I've probably only got, say, 3 millimeters of gap when I push it hard up, and that's before it even actually engages into the rear housing. So it's not going to work as planned. I'll have to go and buy some longer screws and then get these fitted off. All right, with the first failed attempt for the headlights, I'm going to move on to the rear vents, because all I need to do is drill some holes and put some bolts in. So hopefully these bolts are long enough to pass through the fiberglass. Probably shouldn't joke about that. I'm going to take this off. I did just have it sort of clamped on to get a bit of an idea as to how it was all going to sit. So I'll take that off. I'll take off the plastic, and then I can just use the existing holes that are being provided by the manufacturer as a guide, drill through the fiberglass and get them bolted off. Just could not get this body panel high enough. I think sitting on the floor is going to be the best way to tackle it. All right, I think I'll go grab some bolts and start getting these fitted off so that it'll hold itself in place. They don't even pass through the other side of the fiberglass. Let's try something that might be a bit flatter. Put that in there to hold it in place while I drill the next one so it don't move. No good. So basically none of these supplied screws are going to hold these panels on. So I'm back to the drawing board. I think I might just call it there. I'm going to go and buy the correct length screws that I need to actually be able to fit these panels off. I'm going to get some longer screws for the tail lights, and then we'll come back and get all these fitted off. All right, after a quick trip down to the hardware store, I have managed to get myself some longer stainless steel screws for the tail lights. So I'm going to have another crack at fitting them up. Now, I wasn't able to get the bolts that I wanted for the grille panels, but I did just get a zinc plated bolt that I can use as a temporary fitting, just so I can actually put a couple of bolts in each panel, hold it in place and drill out all the holes, so I at least get most of the process completed. I will have to order in some bolts. I do want to stick with the same sort of style with the Allen key or the hex head fitting. So I'm going to have to wait for them to come in, but at least I can progress for now. So let's get stuck back into it. This is really not easy.
A few moments later.
Seems to have got one side in, but not the other. This rear vent panel, I have just popped a couple of the new screws that I've just gone and purchased, or bolts that I've just gone and purchased. This one in the middle seems to be fine, but unfortunately this one on the corner is still too short, so I'm going to have to get some a little bit longer when I order the correct ones. And I think this probably actually worked out well. I've got these cheap ones. I can test to find out what length I need each of them to be and go and order the correct number at that length. So currently these ones are 20 millimeters long. I think the ones that came in the kit were only about 10 or 12 millimeters. They were half an inch. So these are probably closer to 3/4 of an inch. And I think for this particular one on the corner here, I can't get a nut on the back of that still because there's so much fiberglass built up behind there. I'm going to have to get a 1-inch screw for some of them. So at least this is now held in place. I'm going to get one more put in before I remove the clamp, and then I can go around, drill them all out, test the length of the bolts, and then go and get them ordered. Okay, I think that'll do it. I've just got obviously the 4 screws in there, or the 4 bolts in there. What I've found is the corner ones are quite deep in terms of the fiberglass. Where the body's been molded around, there's quite a radius there. So it's going to require the longer bolts. So I will order the 1-inch bolts for the corners, and obviously these ones I've fitted off so that I know that those 20mm bolts fit off fine. I'll move along now to the other side and get the other vent panel and tail light fitted off, and then we'll jump up top and fit off the top vent. Okay, so this will have to come off to fit my reverse light. So basically the reverse light will just mount in the back there, and it'll sit just behind the face of that vent panel. I'm going to keep going with the tail light, and I'll take this off and I'll work out the positioning of the reverse light later. I'll drill the holes on the drill press, and then we'll be able to fit it off. Alright, so I'll just show you the difference in the length of these screws that I've had to purchase. I can't remember what the supplied ones are, but I'm guessing they're probably about 20 or 25 millimeters, so say around 1 inch, compared to the new ones. So the new ones are 38 or 40 millimeters. Okay, so now the awkward part of trying to screw these tail lights in again. All right, much quicker than the other one. Pretty happy with that. We'll jump up top and I'll get the top vent fitted. All right, so for the top vent, I had already drilled one hole because I just wanted to test the original bolts that came with the kit to see if they were going to fit up here, noting that they didn't fit on the rear vents. So I've just put a bolt in there and tightened it up, and I'm going to use that to now get this as evenly spaced as possible, and then get another hole drilled. Okay, with that held in place, I'll now drill the rest of them. Okay, I'm not going to bother putting any more bolts into that because, like I said, they are only temporary, but I will just go around and check each of them later so I can confirm the quantities for each length. With that done, I think I'm going to start having a look at my third brake light. I'm probably going to cut well short of the line of where I've marked up just to play it safe, but keen to get that started and just see how we go to try and get a nice tight fit for the LED strip light. Alright, so now I'm on to the third brake light here. I've got my lines drawn. I'm going to try and cut well within them because I would rather sand it back and spend that extra time and effort to get it right rather than cutting too much to start with. Not an easy spot to get to. I've tried to sit on the floor and pop my head up through the engine cover here, but I'm looking up and I'm just worried I'm going to get too much fiberglass in my face or in my eyes. So I am just going to try and reach over, see how it goes. Worst case, I might need to get someone to give me a hand to stand this up on end so that I'm then working down and this is sort of, sitting flat on top. I'm going to start with the Dremel to see how that goes cutting into the fiberglass. Typically I find the Dremel just takes forever to get through anything, but I think it's just a little bit easier to manage than an angle grinder given this location. So just because of the awkward angle that I'm on there, I have just snapped the blade. But other than that, it's actually cutting really well. I don't know if it's cut right through yet, but it's making light work of it so far. So I shall get another blade and have another go. Alright, so other than constantly snapping blades, it's actually done a pretty good job. I can't quite tell if it's cut all the way through the thickness of the fiberglass. Because it does sort of wrap around in such a small area, there's a good chance that it's quite thick. I think what I might do is look to drill a hole at each end, just so I can sort of start to get in there, and I might then be able to somehow get a little saw or something in there to trim the rest of it out. All right, I'm just starting to get a little bit of give in a couple of these pieces. Not a lot, but a little. Okay, so it seems to me the bottom has gone all the way through, but the top hasn't quite. Might just see if I can break it out, and then I can just sand back anything on the inside. So as you can see, it really is just like that last little inside sheet that hasn't cut across the top. So I'll get this cleaned out, and I'll be able to trim all that up nicely. All right, so here's a bit of a closer look at how it's looking so far. I did actually get pretty close to the line, top and bottom, only because I just felt comfortable with the Dremel, and it was cutting through it quite well. I have still got a bit on the ends to trim, but that's okay. What I'll do is I'll cut out this last little bit of fiberglass that's sitting in there, and then I'll start with my test fitting of the LED light. And I can just continue to shave it back a little bit at a time as needed.
A few moments later.
Close-up view of how that's cleaned up. All right, I'll get to filing down that bottom edge, and hopefully when I check back in, the LED light will be able to fit. All right, so finally got the third brake light fitted up. It was as difficult as I expected it to be, but all in all, I think it's probably just my confidence levels now. It wasn't overly difficult or too daunting, really. So I will remove that tape just so I can get a better look at how it's finished, but that LED is just sort of pushed in there. It's sitting there just with a little bit of pressure, which is perfect. I will look to try and silicone that in as well, just to hold it in place, and I can run the wiring back down and around when I get to that stage. And here we have it with the tape removed. I'm really happy with that finish. There's one little chip at the top here and one on the side here, but there's a number of chips all over the car from the factory that need to be fixed up anyway, so I'll just add them to the list. So this is how I've got it sitting. Basically, I've got the black casing pushed into the body, and I've left the red lens protruding out. I think that just gives the best finish, because the angles start to change and it would make it look smaller if I tried to push it back any further. Really happy with that for something that I've come up with myself. Okay, so unfortunately I have lost the audio to these last couple of clips, so I'm going to try and recap what I think I might have been referring to in these sections. So I was just making a comment in regards to the rear license plate recess. I've decided that I do want to go ahead and purchase some aluminium sheet and cut down a panel to fill in that section. So I'm not going to proceed with the installation of the rear license plate lamps in this episode. However, I am going to continue with the installation of the reverse light. But before I do that, I could not help myself but to remove the protective film over the grills to expose the nice polished alloy. Now in hindsight, what I probably should have done is left the protective coating on this particular grille on the driver's side, because I still had to place it in the drill press and drill the holes to mount the reverse light. I think if I polished up the alloy plate for the license plate recess, it would tie in really nicely with those polished grills. Alright, so jump back in here. I have drilled the holes out on the drill press for the reverse light. I just used the existing bracket on the back of the reverse light to mark out those holes and drill them out. As you can see, I have placed a protective, sort of like a masking tape film over that panel just so it didn't scratch up that nice polished face that's going to be on the external face as I was doing that. And now I can proceed to fit off that reverse light with the supplied bolts and spacers so that the front of the light sits flush with the rear of the grille. And there it is with the reverse light fitted off into the grille. I can now remove the protective film that I've put over the grille and reinstall it into the rear clip. So that wraps up today's video. I'm really happy with the progress that I've made. What seems like such a simple task makes such a big difference in the overall perception of how progressed the build is. So be sure to like these videos, hit the subscribe button. There's plenty more content to come as I work through the remaining steps of this build.